So we're returning with a conversation here with Will Spencer, who, if you would really quickly reintroduce yourself for those who were listening from the last episode.
Yes, my name is Will Spencer. I'm the host of the Renaissance of Men podcast, a podcast about the 40-year process to redeem masculinity, reconcile men and women, and what I call the Great Reconciliation in Christ. And so I host a podcast, create content on social media. You can find me basically everywhere at Ren of Men, and I also have men's groups and do 12-week men's mentorships.
Remind me before we close this one off on why you're using a 40-year window. But before we get into that,
Mhm.
where we ended off our conversation with the first half of this interview, you were talking about how COVID as well as other current contemporary events have sort of revealed or exposed or even transitioned from a secure environment to now a very fragile environment for many, at least Americans, but the world, the West and the world as a whole. And I want to hear about that, especially as you were presenting it from not only like talking about COVID, but talking about economic and individual choices, family units, and so
Mhm.
forth. Can we rebuild where we were left off because we had a lively intermission?
Yeah. So I think COVID didn't create the insecurity. I think it just revealed it. It was always there, and it revealed just how few people are truly liberty minded and how many people are consensus minded. So that when the governments and world organizations of the world could say everyone needs to lock inside their homes, that most people said like, okay, it's like, and now you need to put this into your bloodstream. Okay, just once. Okay, that's fine. Two times. Okay, right, and that was way more people than I think anyone expected, right? And so now we're recognizing that the our neighbors, our friends, our family members do not share our values on the most fundamental level. Now, that
Yes.
doesn't necessarily that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to turn you into a secret police force, but you definitely recognize that the way that we process reality in terms of our liberty as human beings on earth and who we're ultimately accountable to, God, is very different from the way most people believe that they are accountable to a state,
Hmm.
right? And so that was always there, but COVID revealed it very clearly. And so there have been a lot of people that have been left in this position like, I need to remove myself from these consensus systems, right? How do I go about doing that? And so that's the point that we left off at, to begin transitioning out of these consensus systems to individualized production home-based businesses and how that fits together with reconciling the sexes, because a productive household is only possible with two people. You need a man and woman in reconciliation to each other, aligned on mission, moving forward together towards a shared vision. And so that's where we left off.
So the first episode had a lot more to do with the provision side of this equation, where
Mhm.
let's just say men's responsibility or men's role to provide in this way to cultivate a healthy lifestyle for his family, to develop, to grow things within within his family, even maybe as it extends to his community. And this provision part, you just added something that I was like, well, now we need an addendum
Mm.
because there's a little bit more. Um, how what can you summarize quickly what do you see as like the woman how women participate in the family? Most of my concern in writing is as a man for men and thought on that way. But what about like with women's part? What is women's part to play in this reconciliation process when it comes to provision?
Mhm. So men and women relate to reality differently. We use different tools. Men relate to reality primarily through their mind and through their body. Very rational, very physical. That's how we carve civilization out of stone and wood. We're very rational beings. Women relate to reality through feelings and intuition. It's like different sensors for how they navigate through the world, right? So they're complementary, as God's design is. When you have a productive household focused on producing a livelihood that feeds them both and their children, and you bring together the woman as a helper towards the man, to bringing her feeling and intuition to a man's rationality and physicality, when you bring those two things together, you can create an unstoppable combination, because women take in different information than men do and process it differently, so they get other perspectives. And you see this when a man goes from being a bachelor to being married. If she moves in with him, what does she do? She adds a woman's touch to the place, and suddenly it goes from being a house to a home. That's a small version of it. So if you have as a man have a home-based business that you're building, and maybe you've even achieved some success, the addition of your wife as a helper to you in that mission can multiply, magnify your business far beyond what you ever would have expected, because she will look at problems differently and solve them in ways that you would never think of. So that's what I mean. That's how she can be a helper to you on the mission. You have to be on the mission. You have to have a vision that you're going towards, something that you've already built, something that's showing results in, something that's moving forward and has momentum of its own. But the addition of a good woman onto that, and her unique insights and abilities, and her unique feminine wisdom, can bless your business in ways that are far beyond imaginable, if you as a man have the ability to recognize that her insight has value. Like, if you can sacrifice some of your own pride as being the man that needs to have all the answers, because we don't, and can take that in. Like, how many men have you met or talked to, or have we both met, where it's like the man will be struggling with a problem, and then her just wife will walk by and just say something casual. What about this? It's like, what? You just what? And it's the solution to the problem. It's because of women's unique gifts of intuition and feeling
Mhm.
that they can see those problems. And you can see that in a home-based business as well. We're meant to work together towards common purpose.
So then this has opens up a bit of a window in my own life regarding counseling and perhaps even and a little bit of therapy involving. I'm a very intellect focused individual. No
Mhm.
surprise, right? There's no. I'm like if I have an archetype, it's this. It's probably the wizard at this point in time.
I can see
Um,
that.
it's very like my default is analytics.
Mhm.
And I've even suffered in the sense of, like, stopping to see life as activities and starting to see them as writing prompts, not a fun place. But the in I was receiving some counseling or some I guess they call it therapy, whatever, that had to do with helping me become more, as in you'd say, in tune with my intuition. Um, what,
Mhm.
and it was interesting too, because like, it was so foreign to me. Intuition. It's either what I want, carnal, or what I think, intellectual.
Mhm.
No, like there's a third option. I don't get it. Any commentary on that quickly?
Yes, I mean, we're not perfectly as beings broken in half,
Yes.
right? Men do have intuition, and women do have rationality. Like,
Yes.
we're not, but when two halves come together, when you get complementary wholes, and that's why you have dialogue, and that's why you have interaction. But yes, men can and do need to cultivate certain form, like their intuition as well. And we operate in intuition in many different things. Particularly you as a soldier, there's probably been times in your career, in the field, where you would walk into a space and, like, I don't like what's going on here and I can't see why. And you back slowly away, right? Or similar. That's intuition that's operating that. It's non-rational, our body taking in information from sources we don't exactly know where. So men do have intuition and women do have rationality. And so I
Mhm.
don't mean to exclude those abilities from each other, but it's just the
No.
primary way that we used to relate to reality.
We don't live in that caricature that it's like, well, men are it's not we don't live in the caricature that men are solely rational and women are solely intuition, and we know that there are
Correct.
measures, and it's not very clear. But okay, so we need to move on, otherwise we're gonna be chasing this dragon back to the wizard uh a little too long.
Sure.
um so right now, as like, as this is going on right at the time that we're recording this episode, there's this movie, The Sound of Freedom, that I'm sure people who are listening to this have heard more than they care to now about whether its successes or the responses or the absurdities of the responses to this movie that's supposed to be revealing elements of human trafficking, and the global slave trade, particularly dealing with children. um but what I think, that as you brought it up earlier, I think account like COVID revealed how fragile our liberty is because of how willing so many people are to just go away with its destruction or go along with its destruction or its
Yeah.
infringement. Um,
Yeah.
whether by willing like whether by support of it or by abdication, and then
Mhm.
on top of that, it revealed some of the economic uncertainty and fragility of our system. I think the internet has actually had a lot more to do with that than something like COVID,
Mhm.
although it certainly had an impact. Maybe the millennial generation is becoming aware that politics does have a play in whether or not you can put gas in your car. And
Yeah.
then and this movie, this video, The Sound of Freedom, as well as the internet, as well as um, kind of a change in the tone of the social milieu when it comes to security minded individuals, is that we're becoming much more aware of the reality of this thing called called human trafficking or the global trade, that it's not something with a bad guy like in the movie Taken, or it's not something so simple. It's rather this massive decentralized framework that exists underneath the surface of our society, that causes us to wonder at the fragility of it as a whole, our society, and the weakness of our, like, the inability of our authoritarian or centralized law enforcement to deal with it.
Mm.
And it has to do
Yeah.
with I mean, quite frankly, the thing that we call human trafficking, I hear this complaint quite often, and that is, why is our federal system, why is our federal government, our federal law enforcement focusing on parents who are protesting or opposing transgenderism in their schools, or the potential grooming of their children? Why is the FBI being sent after them, not being more public and aggressive about dismantling these human trafficking networks in our environment? And the answer, or like, why is the ATF going after braces instead of going after um, certain activities that use firearms or use weapons for heinous crimes? And I think the answer is, in some sense, because they're just incapable of doing it. They can't do it. The
Yeah.
FBI is impotent when it comes to legitimized, decentralized crime, because they're relying on a centralized command structure that has been corrupted by a political system. They can't do it. The ATF can't deal with a decentralized network because it's too focused on this centralized rule of law in its own, well, not even rule of law, this centralized control system. And so, I think on the one hand it can't do it, but on the other hand, I think so many Americans are becoming, are realizing or feeling, maybe it's not awareness, it's not enlightenment, but they're feeling just how fragile this world is.
Mm. Mhm. Well, there are
2020 did that
3.
really. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah,
Sorry.
2020 was 2020. The way I'm trying to pick a road that won't have us chasing the dragon into the wilderness. Um, 2020 revealed a lot to a lot of people. And so, based on what you're saying, is why are these agencies going after everyday Americans and not Hunter Biden? You know, like I was watching a live stream last night where they were talking about, Hunter, like cocaine being found in the White House. Like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot that they found Hunter's cocaine in the White House over all the videos of him weighing crack rocks and banging hookers. Sorry, I forgot about the whole cocaine thing. Why is it that the vice president's son is walking free, and yet Americans are being harassed at school board meetings, right? So I've broken the explanations into 3 categories. One of the ones that you said is incompetence. Things are this way because people just they're not capable of doing. They're not capable of building a better world. The other explanation that people give is coincidence. Like it's just a coincidence. Those two pieces don't fit. The only other third one is conspiracy. Either it's planned, either it's accidental, or it's just because people are incompetent. And I think talking about human trafficking in the way that you are is a combination of all 3.
Oh, for
right?
sure.
I think
Yeah,
that,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah, like that, like, and you can read Whitney Webb's books, One Nation Under Blackmail. It's 2 volume set where she traces in incredible journalistic detail the origins of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell back to the 1920s. And she goes literally year by year with just I have no idea where she found these sources, actual cited journalistic sources that shows that the global sex traffic trade that's currently used to blackmail people in high places has its origins in the dockyards of New York City in the 1920s for the New York Mafia. And that's where she starts and she goes all the way forward. And so there are aspects of that that are part of this as well.
Do you believe that her do you and this is gonna be a reasonability argument, do you believe that if given the opportunity, you could, identify those sources, that they could be identified and clarified? Or are we stuck trusting her?
I mean, do you want me to get the books and go and look? And right here next to my desk, I can actually list the actual the journalistic citations. Like the whole first 50 pages are almost unreadable because it's note, 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 note. It's I mean, I
Okay,
was
so she
stunned.
is citing events. She is actually it's
Yeah.
not okay, okay. The reason why I'm saying it is that when it comes to let's something that we call conspiracy, right? And I know people attach cultural terms to it like conspiracy and theory, but the point is that the problem with most conspiracy theories is that they are built on they are predicated on the absence of evidence being the evidence of the alternative theory. We don't
Yes. Correct.
have because we don't have this, that means this must be true. And this
Right.
is like, well, and so everything is explained away by the conspiracy. Whereas in an event, whereas in a conversation like this, let's be very clear. If your information cannot be verified and that your theory is based on the absence of evidence, it's not a theory, or it's not a usable theory.
Hmm.
If there's no way to definitively say at this time Jim was here and did the action,
Correct.
you know what I mean? These kind of things. So that moves it away from the masturbatorial side of conspiracy theory. And I know it's funny, but it's like that's what most conspiracy theory is
Hmm.
masturbating a sense of being informed. It's creating a feeling in oneself that you're part of
Hmm.
like a secret force to fight against the evil, and it's like no.
Yes.
It's
Yeah, I agree
usually
with you.
it's usually masturbatory, and that's why we find it so distasteful, is because it's like, well, it's immoral for you to think that you're a part of the anti-Illuminati or whatever it is. You don't
Right.
why? Like,
Right.
you're a wine mom from Edina,
I know what you're talking about. Well,
you
so
know?
so sorry, go ahead.
I'm finished.
Well, I think one of the things that I tell people is that um, what conspiracy theory in a formal sense is good for is saying what didn't happen. Normally, the mainstream narrative of anything is what didn't happen, and conspiracy theory is very good for poking holes in mainstream narratives. What it is not good for is saying what did happen, and a
Okay.
lot of people, yeah, that's the position. Now, there are rare occasions where material is produced in the realm of what we might technically call conspiracy theory, where actual evidence of actual malfeasance is produced, is surfaced, is documented. There are few occasions. And when those few occasions happen, they're very powerful and they're very scary to look at, and you don't get to hear about them. They go away. And so Whitney Webb's books One Nation Under Blackmail are a good example of that. It's the things that she does. They're very few, and
Mhm.
you have to almost travel to the bottom of the rabbit hole to get them. But the kind of stuff that most people consider conspiracy theory is wild speculations about whatever. Because, and you say very rightly that it makes people feel like they're part of something. Like I have special insider Gnostic information. I am
Yeah.
part of. Yeah, exactly. I'm part of something. I see the world the way it is, and I build my identity around this, and that gives people a sense of belonging, even if it's a sense of outsider belonging. And so you're very right about that. um, and but within that field you can actually find things that are like people do the work, they do the effort, and they surface things, and it can be very uh, shocking, revealing to see it for what it is.
Yeah,
And
so
then that's
going
not a
back,
place, that's not a comfortable place.
yeah, and so going back to this thing called human trafficking, which
Yes.
in a sense in the 21st century and the internet is revealing how pervasive it is. And what I mean by pervasive is it's really kind of everywhere. Right. And I
Yeah.
mean, whether it's sex offender lists, whether it's corruption in government, whether it's kidnappings in your local community, whether it's, let's take Minnesota as an example. You've got an indigenous population that's preyed upon. You've got highways of movement, whether it's the actual interstate freeways, or you've got the waterways of the Mississippi River. You've got access to the Great Lakes, which is access to the ocean. And all of
Mm,
these things, all of these factors come together where, oh, and then by the way, you've got rabid, so what we should actually call antisocial movements that control that ravage the cities, sowing chaos and blindness, causing discouragement from law enforcement to even participate in their community, and an abdication of the population from standing up and saying no, we will not be subjugated. And
yeah.
so, all of these factors come together to identify the suicide of a city being Minneapolis,
Yeah.
and the factors that contribute to human trafficking as a reality. Not only, not only, and this is even a thing that happened. Small story cases. It was in, I believe it was still in 2020 when we had like the heat of the Black Lives Matter, Eye of Sauron or whatever burning on
Mhm.
Minneapolis, and you had these young characters sort of rise to prominence, even if it was only through social media and local activism. And if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, it was, you had like 6 or 7 of these young male leaders, these young black male leaders who became kind of like, they were at every rally, they were present at everything, and all 7 of them, I don't remember exactly how many there were, I think it was 6 or 7, all 6 or 7 of them were all within a pretty quick timeline discovered to be participating in some form of predatory activity,
Yeah.
whether it was like 2 of them I think were actually running a brothel. um One of them was using his newfound status as an influencer to rape women. Another
Mm.
one was, and it's just like, so it's not exclusive to that movement by no means, but it was interesting to see how the chaos of this event was utilized by predators to take advantage of um that madness, to turn a trick, so to speak.
Mhm. Yeah.
um
That's just men using status and power to, men who seek status and power, using that status and power to fulfill their carnal desires
So let's turn away from the situational back to the principled. What do you see as a moral imperative for being a protector?
of you're talking about like in a household.
Yes. Where
Yeah.
does this moral imperative come from? And I don't think it's need.
Well, I think part of it comes from our design as men.
Okay.
I think um, we're made to bear loads. Like our bodies are physically constructed, our bone density, our testosterone, our muscle capacity, right? We're made to bear physical loads. So a great example of this is in war, but you can wind it back to like World War One, right? The life in the trenches, that long form of suffering punctuated by bouts of terror, like for better or worse, men's bodies, psyches. And by body I don't just mean our physical bodies, but I mean our psychological construction is designed to endure that, right?
Yeah, I
um
mean, you can go back further, Napoleonic Wars, European conflicts, crusades, and so forth.
yes.
It's okay.
Yeah. So we're designed to do that. Like maybe not all of us are designed to do it at that extreme, but that's a component of our design as men. So the ability to be physically capable of violence is built into us,
We're
right?
designed to be capable. Okay, Say that one more time because I think that was
The ability to be physically capable of violence is built into us, I think is how
okay.
I phrased it.
Yes, that's
So,
an excellent line.
but also the ability to bear the load of responsibility, right? And so as a man, to bear the load of responsibility for a family, your wife and your children are vulnerable. The word vulnerable comes from the Latin vulnus, which means wound, right? And your wife and children are able to be wounded. They are in many ways they are not totally defenseless, but they have far fewer defenses than a man naturally does. So we must defend them as men, right? And we're designed and made to do that. Now you can take that design and you can turn it all the way up and turn it into war, or you can turn it into, aggressive action. You can become quite skilled in it, as I'm sure you know, right? And many men do. That capacity, however, lives within all men as only, if only in potential. And I believe it is every man's responsibility to cultivate some of that potential to put into service for a family. His moral obligation to cultivate that aspect of himself, to put into service for a family. And in years past, it used to be, kings used to come along and say that capacity for violence that you've cultivated to protect your family, now I need it. Come with me, we're going to battle. Now that's less so the case now, but
It's
that
less.
same
It's
capacity. Yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
It's less. It's less so the cape or less so the time now. But I also don't know if I can completely romanticize that part of the past. It's not that you did.
Right.
It's that there were still professional soldiers and there were still professional fighters. They just were. Well, I mean, they probably held the same percentage. It's a small percentage of the population. The question that I'm looking for is that are you able to come to having there be a moral imperative for men's capability of violence, men cultivating a capability of violence not on the basis of need. I am capable of defending my family, but I'm also capable of seeing justice. And you
Hmm.
can't just believe in justice. It's important to be able to enact it,
Right.
which then
The
runs
best.
can run dangerously close to vigilantism. Um,
Right.
but I mean, when we're talking about human trafficking, it's probably the closest moral argument for vigilantism that you can find.
Right. Yeah. Good point. The best distinction that I've heard about this, and maybe in some technical philosophical sense it wouldn't be accurate, but I like the language, is the distinction between force versus violence. As a
Okay.
man, you should be capable of using force, right? And that can be physical force, mental force, etc. You should be capable of using force. Force can be used defensively. Violence is offensive. I don't know it's necessary for every man. And this is what the zombie apocalypse movies are about essentially. That's the big drama of them. Is you see men that are not capable of force or violence begin to develop force and then find themselves in capacities where they have to reckon with the moral obligation to do violence. That's Rick from The Walking Dead. A good man who discovers his innate capacity for force and then grapples movingly with his ability and necessity to apply violence, right? Because all the
Yeah,
constraints of society are removed. That's what that
exactly.
is.
It
Yeah.
it it it, tur- it turns a complex moral problem into a very simple, like it narrows the lens of moral inquisition into the actions of the individual and his capacity and his relationship to capacity and his decisions, because you've already dehumanized your bad guy by turning them into a zombie, literally.
Yes.
So
Or you have the Negan type character, right? Like I stopped watching when he came in, but they're still like, well, this is objectively a bad dude. How much violence is legitimate and moral, and under what circumstances for me to apply to keep my soul? Because he doesn't have one, right? That's the eternal question. That's the just war theory. That whole thing. But so regardless of whether we become capable of exerting offensive violence, and I think that I would have to really think through this statement, but I'm going to try on. There are probably very few circumstances where the average man will even begin to confront the question. I think as men today, we not only have a moral imperative to discover how to use force, right? I think we can't truly discover what it means to be a man unless we come into relationship with our ability to create force. We have to know that about ourselves. If you don't know that about yourself, if you haven't actively put yourself into a situation where you can discover your own ability to exert force on a situation or a person, right? Then you're missing a big part of what it means to be a man. And many men are. I was until I learned how to do those things.
Yep, and there's a very physical reality to it, and then there's a very physical side. Like it's not this is not an abstract concept. We're talking
Yes.
about being able to use legitimate force, not
Yes.
theoretical force, not what I would do in this situation kind of force, not stockpiling force, none of this kind of stuff, but like genuine. There have been times in my life where I have learned things and trained things as a ranger, as a shooter, as a competitor, as a this, as a that. And then there are off every once in a while, and it's like I swear it's like every 4 years, maybe three on a good run, where like there is an event and a moment that takes place where like I got it now. And I see the
Mm,
outcome of what that training and this is my own experience, but like there was a moment in a training course where like it struck like a lightning bolt of like, nope,
mm,
I know what I'm doing right now. And it was and the rest of it was execution, and that is your closest thing to a flow state. But instead of
yeah.
chasing the feeling, yes, men. So do you think there's something important? There's a moral imperative for men to be able to become familiar with that capability of force. I would
Yes.
agree.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it's not just moral in terms of right and wrong. I think it's part of discovering who you are as a man. I think it's part of learning what it means to have a spine, right? To learn your own capacity, to learn your own power.
well, how
This is why I go ahead.
how shameful is it a man who can't say no?
Right. Right? Or how shameful is a man that can't say yes? There are lots of men that can't say yes because they recognize that to say yes to an opportunity like building a productive household will require them to exert force over their environment, if only their own discipline, if only the lifting the weight of starting a business, right? They don't say yes to it. So there's both.
Mhm. Yeah, I can see that one. Yep, yep. I see your point. I don't do
Mhm.
you think do you hold a view that this idea of there's a do you hold this idea this do you hold a view that this idea of like a productive household is attainable by almost all men, or is it o- because I think there's a little bit of an attitude that can come up from time to time that being self-employed is kind of only for the rare and exceptional.
That's a great question. I think it's undeniable that that some men are designed to work in teams, right? Like maybe your home based business. Maybe not every man in the ancient past had a home based business. Maybe some men worked for other men. So that's the picture that I would paint. Um, but perhaps it's true that not all men are called to be individual solo artisans. Um, so yeah, I mean, today I think you probably make that case. Yeah, because I'm thinking like if we wind back the clock 5,000 years, were all the men then capable of having productive households, right? Because if they were back then, like
I
the
just
only reason we'd be less capable is because of we're of degeneration, but it's not innate.
Well, I'm running aground of the argument a little bit, and the reason why is that if it can come across as a little bit noble savage if it's not done complete. And
Correct. Yes, I agree.
what I mean in that sense is that like, yeah, you know what happened 2,000 years ago, and 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, you had things like the Babylonian Empire, you had things like the Greek Empire, you had people who um who existed in countries or and war and nations, not even nations, in kingdoms at that time, where they were a part of a larger machine. They were the advisor to the king. They were part of the court. They were part of the guard. They were part of the army. They were a member of a guild. Now, maybe, and
Yeah.
what we might be seeing is that the corporate structure in the United States has a that the corporate structure in the United States and the West as a whole, and even worsened by this idea called stakeholder capitalism,
Mhm.
lays the consequences of failure on the community, but gives the benefits of success to the individual. Not the
Mm,
individual, but it centralizes successes, and it democratizes failures.
yes. Yeah. I think you're right. I think men did belong to those guilds, but I think the trying to map the current corporate structure, compare the two. I don't think it compares, because in the current corporate structure, for example, you spend somewhere between 15 to 60, if not more, commuting to this environment, where in the environment it's hyper artificial with fluorescent lighting. Language is compromised because you can't speak in the aggressive way that men speak to each other and tease each other. It has to be made friendly and safe for women, which causes men to relate in unnatural ways, and all the rough edges have to be sanded off so there's minimal conflict and moving information around. And then you drive home at the end of the night. Like, I think that's the corporate life. I think that's very different from you wake up in the morning, you kiss your wife, you go walk 5 or 10 minutes to the local foundry or whatever, and you bang on steel all day with your boys and tell jokes and pick on each other, and then you come home charged up with testosterone and a few burns, and then make another baby. So I think these two things are very different.
I do think they're different. I just don't want to be comparing. I don't want to be comparing anecdotes. I want to be trying to look at principles on it,
Sure.
because I need to go back to the role of a protector too. In our society, and even in gun culture, we've divided protectors into, like, the law enforcement, the military, and then the capable citizen. And
Mm,
I think there's a solution for the capable citizen question in regards to its particular role in society. Perhaps something so much to the extent of um the the role of a gosh, I'm almost losing it as I'm it's on the tip of my
I
tongue.
get it.
No, it's the there is something about being a part of a society which is that it requires the capability of violence or the capability of force amongst men.
Hmm.
And being able to that allows them to not allows that to not it's not allowing, but it ah, is that men languish in their beds at night because they are told that the human trafficking that happens in their neighborhood is somebody else's problem.
Right. Okay.
It's somebody else's problem to deal with. You can't do anything about it. You're small. You're just a citizen. Go get work your job and vote.
Hmm.
And it's like, and I think what the awareness, the idea of human trafficking as like, or this movie is doing, is it's acting like a call to adventure for a lot of men.
Oh, well said. That okay. I haven't seen it yet, but that makes sense.
Yeah, it's acting like a call to adventure, even in like the Joseph Campbell sense. It's acting as a
Yeah.
call to adventure of a lot of men, which sounds a lot like a call to action. and where you get almost, what's that movie, Office Space, where the
Hmm.
man leaves. No, it wouldn't be Office Space. It would be Fight Club, where the man leaves his corporate job to go become in the end, domestic terrorism with a brain aneurysm, or with a,
Right.
whatever,
Schizophrenia.
schizophrenia. And so, like, the point being said is, um the role of the protector has been abdicated from society and given to a select few, who are then told to be defunded because they did their job.
Yes.
And that's an interesting place. It's an interesting country to live in.
Hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
we're
We have
struggling
we.
with it. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a great observation, that men's innate desire to provide has been broken out of them and sort of applied to these captains of industry that build these giant corporations that are funded by the money printer. But so men's innate desire to be a provider has been outsourced, because when you work for a giant corporation, you're separate from the immediate outcome of your labor. So you work and you help produce this giant thing that takes thousands of people, and you get some share of the revenue from that. But you don't see the direct impact of your work. Very few people do. So your innate desire as a provider is taken a couple levels of abstraction away from the actual thing that you've created. That's very disorienting for many men. And then in the same way, to be a protector, you've outsourced that to law enforcement and the military. So men have taken these two fundamental aspects of their nature and they've been shattered out of them and sprinkled all over society. And so men feel very alienated in that. And so by reestablishing a productive household, you integrate both of those pieces back into yourself. And you
Yeah,
and you yeah.
yeah, go ahead. I'm
And
listening.
yeah, and the one thing I want to be really clear about, because I think this is kind of what you were hitting at, is I don't want to be prescriptive to a man. Like I'm not the guy who's going to say here and say, unless you have a productive household, you're not a man. That's not me, right? What I'm trying to say is these are aspects of who we are that we can cultivate and develop and take in the direction that our conscience and intuition and family and circumstances drives us to. But these are principles that we can base our choices off of rather than pretending the principles don't exist. They do.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The I think in as we start to kind of close this off, we should address, some of the things that are. I don't even know if we can go there. We don't have time for that.
I'll go there.
Uh,
We'll go
I,
we'll go there quickly. We'll stop in for a brief visit there.
Brief visit. We'll do a preview of the next conversation that we have. But we've talked a bit about. You've talked quite a bit about being a provider. We've talked about the abdication of being a provider by the corporate structure. We've talked about opportunities and ways out of it that might fit certain people, and they might be able to be applicable to certain situations. We've also or that people can actually embrace and engage in. We've talked about the fragility of our environment and how these durable trades are sort of an antithesis to that fragility. Now you could even go into they might be even anti-fragile, ergo Nicholas Nassim Taleb, who likes to get referenced in this show.
Mm,
And then we've talked about productivity, not just productivity, but we've talked about being a protector and how that is made more difficult by our society because of the time that we live in. And we can't put that genie back in the bottle. We can't put industrialization away. And so what we're facing as a culture and as a community is a great difficulty of being able to take of a man being able to take proper place in his society because it's been stripped of him, pulled from him, and he's now literally the communist cog in the wheel.
yeah. Denatured, deracinated, defanged, declawed, disillusioned,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Decentralized. Yeah.
Well, decentralized. What do you mean by decentralized? I think we are. I think we've been horribly centralized. We all have to look to the tower to give us our bread and circus.
Yeah, I mean decentralized as a man. Like where is your moral center?
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, yeah. Very much so.
Hmm. Yeah. And we started the conversation in the first half talking about conservatism not being able to find any strong principles. Like it knows what it's against, it doesn't know what it's for. And
Yes.
again, this is why as a man, Christ is such an important part of my life because I recognize in the picture portrayed by Scripture. I recommend the book Masculine Christianity by Zach Garris. That could be
Okay.
another great guest on your show, where he points out how masculine Christianity is as a religion. And I discovered that myself.
Mm-hmm.
That was like 20 years of exploring and trying to understand masculinity, and then 30 years exploring world religions, both dovetailed into Christ in this completely providential way. And so, for men to look and find their center, everything that I've talked about, reconciliation with women, the productive household, protector, provider, all of these things are contained within the Christian story. And they happen to be and also the moral call as well. They happen to be so nourishing to men's souls. And where do you go to find that? You go to find that in Christianity. And that's why conservatism is losing slowly, because it will not root itself in Christianity because they're all sinners and they don't want to admit it either. They want to have their comfortable sin as well and take the money printer cash from the liberals. That's my little private editorial take. But this is why Christianity is so nourishing to men. You mentioned Sean Ryan, and there are many others. Is once they begin discovering that they can root their moral center comfortably and permanently there, it reestablishes them as a being, which is what Christianity does. Praise God,
Yeah.
hallelujah.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern with what we consider modern conservatism is that it's straying so heavily into pragmatism that
Yeah,
it's almost utilitarian.
yeah.
It's almost like and sometimes it does it in a way where they even become the caricature of the thing they're accused of being. That doesn't mean that I think I mean I think that generally speaking, I think that people who exist on what is currently referred to as the left are, are have their own subset of problems. Um, and I quite frankly find them hard to relate to.
Yes.
I do. Like I find the mania hard to relate to. I find the mania of like having to have a boogeyman for everything is hard to like I I'm trying to like not just I'm trying to even in a sense be humble about it, but like the mania and the violence of the left is hard for me to relate to because it's ridiculous. But the right or the conservative movement in America seems to be dead set on um, choosing pragmatism,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, that's just a slow suicide. Go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. The way to understand the mania of great phrase, by the way, the mania of liberalism is liberalism in its own writings. Again, we talked about first wave feminism, right? But you can go. There's also a book called Libido Dominandi by E. Michael Jones. Great book. It goes back to the roots of liberalism, really, in the French Revolution, as decisively intentionally anti-God, anti-civilization, and destructive. And he goes through in 600 pages, again, excellently footnoted book, where you can see the evolution of thought process in the destruction of Western civilization. Liberalism is pure anti-God, anti-created order. Ye shall be like gods. That is really what liberalism is about. It is fanatically devoted to destroying any notion of constraint on the most primal and primordial level, destroying God's created order, right?
Yeah.
That's what liberalism is about. Conservatism, by contrast, today, maybe it wasn't always the way, but today is really just about conserving, the way things were, because that kind of worked. And that's the pragmatism point that you're talking about, right?
Hmm.
Well, it worked. So let's go back to what worked. It's like, no, 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 like what worked will not stand up against the destructive force of a movement bent on tearing everything down. Like
Hmm.
you're not going to rationally say to a manic force, "Will this work? Don't destroy it." It's like, "No, I want to destroy." Some men just want to watch the world burn, right? That's liberalism. And so, as men, we need to get to a place where rather than watching the world burn, we build the world, right?
Yes.
It's right? And so where does that come from? Where does the moral imperative, the drive to build, and what are we building? Where does the blueprint come from? It can only come from God and Christ. That's where the positive vision lives, but it comes with a personal cost. The personal cost is repentance. The personal cost is the public acknowledgement of sin, of picking up the phone call and saying I'm sorry, of letting go of unjust ways of living, of sacrificing comfort and pleasure, so people don't want to pay it. But only paying it can we get into a position of men where we can truly begin building righteously. And that's what everyone wants. But you're not going to get something for nothing.
Yeah, there is all of my life I have heard the statement said over and over again, and those who have listened to the show are probably tired of me saying this by now. But it's all of my life I've heard this saying that the country just needs to turn back to God. The country just needs to turn back to God, then we'll turn the country around. And I find that I've come to find that phrase to be a statement of exasperation, not of commitment
Yes.
at this point in time. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people. I am, and what I'm saying is it oftentimes is paired with abdication. Well, the country's just going to hell, so we might as well eat cake and be happy or whatever. And it's not always the case, but it's almost always the country needs to get its act together. It needs to return to Christ. Otherwise, we're gonna face decline. We're gonna face judgment. I agree with that. But however, what I'm really usually when I'm hearing that statement being made, I'm actually considering, what do I think about the person who's saying that? Because I
Yeah.
have heard men say that and say, this country needs to turn to God. And then he and the way that he's saying it, and when I'm listening to him talk, I'm seeing him also then confess, and these are the things that I've been doing wrong, and I've been living by my own means, and I've been turning
Yeah.
away, so I'm going to reorient myself towards the truth. And then
Yes.
I've heard it most often spoken from the position of somebody saying, those people over there need to turn to Jesus, otherwise I will be paying 17% in taxes every month. And you're like, okay, um yeah, like, yeah, maybe other people, there is something that's demanded of the citizens of this country, but returning to Christ doesn't start over there, it starts here. Or
Amen.
returning to principled living doesn't start over there, it starts over here. So don't
Amen.
abdicate your own responsibility because somebody over there is sinning.
Yeah.
It's not a it's this is not an appropriate time to bring up the speck of dust in your friend's eye, a plank in your own eye. I think that even the there's plenty of places where you can see that it's not a plank, it's a fucking skyscraper stabbing through this dude's face.
Yeah.
But there is a difference there. But I think that there is oftentimes that phrase, that exasperation is a statement of lamentation that somebody over there needs to do something.
Well
Uh
said. And can I just can I comment on that real quick?
sure.
Yeah, just real quick. And this is why a lot of people falsely believe that it's necessary to impose Christianity on others by force. So you can't, that's not, you don't see that anywhere in the Gospels. What you see, particularly with Paul, is you see men convicted of their own sin. They know what it means to be sinners. They know the pain of sin. They know how painful it was to pull the toothpick out of their own eye. And having gone through the process of pulling something out of their own eye, they can compassionately be with another person who has to pull whatever they got to out of their own eye. It's not like I'm going to go over there and just tell you what to you need to do this. It's like, no, I went through the discipline of doing it. It hurt. It sucked. I learned things about myself that I didn't like, but I did it, and I can help you to do it too. Please do this with me. That is reconciliation.
Yeah, so in my opinion, I invite you for criticism here.
Okay.
Because I've got one more thing I want to say before we wrap this up, or one more thing
Mhm.
that I think I want to hear your response to. But then this isn't it. It is, in my opinion, this authoritarian form of Christianity, which wishes to impose faith or belief in something on a population, is such a minority that I don't even think it's worth considering. Like
Yeah, you're probably right.
I don't know. I don't to my knowledge, and I exist within the Christian theological framework in its own right, I don't know anybody who is genuinely advocating for forced conversion. I think
Me
what we
neither.
yeah, I don't. On at least from a Christian side, which leads to my second point. There was an interview and a conversation between John Doyle and the streamer who goes by the name of Destiny, who which and they
Hmm.
were on Tim Pool's Culture War. And there was a moment where Destiny said something like, and I know I'm not going to be able to quote this perfectly, but he basically made this statement that is not uncommon, that said something like, the age of religion is over. We have moved on to the age of reason. There will never be a time where America turns away from its secular status quo back towards a religious status quo.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense.
Okay, and the funny thing about it is that I don't think Destiny has a modic as a good idea of what religion or faith really is. I think he's criticizing that we will not be, as he's saying, returning to a very juvenile version of faith. Meanwhile, the only forced conversions we're seeing in this world are being done by the religion of the state, and the transgender, gay, LGBTQ movement. They're closest thing to a forced conversion, because they're going into education systems and telling teachers that they need to sign a religious document that they affirm something in order
Mhm.
to continue teaching.
Mhm.
And so, I think the answer is, you don't think that there isn't there is, if you think that there's no possible way that people will mass convert to a faith, I think you're horribly mistaken. I think you're horribly mistaken, and have no real understanding of history.
Right.
No realistic understanding of history at all, because history is a continuous timeline of people moving from one belief system to another belief system and maintaining these different paradigms in the Thomas Kuhn sense, or religious motifs in others. That the idea that people wouldn't return to a more religiosity, if you want to even call it that way, is just, it's not founded in reality. You don't know what you're talking about.
Mhm.
It's like Neil deGrasse Tyson claiming to be a scientist and then being a philosopher on television. It's like, okay, dude,
Right.
you know.
Well, I would say in response to I have a lot that I would say in response to Destiny, or that, or what his claim. First, man, where do I even start with this? First is that belief itself is religious in nature. Like the
Absolutely.
belief in rationality as the measure of all things is itself a religion. And if I could
Absolutely.
demonstrate, right, okay, so that's one. The second thing is, well, if I could rationally prove Christianity, right, and I can give him a couple books that do that. Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis makes the case for moral case, and then the case for Christ by Lee Strobel makes the historical case. Does that mean then that we have to be religious and be Christian? By his own value standards, so you can invert it there. But the third thing that that really says to me is that there are so few Christian apologists in culture today that would be able to confront him, that would be able to take that, in just in a span of breaths, you can take that whole argument apart. But how few, this is related to the protector conversation, the provider conversation, right? This is related to all these conversations about what it means to be a man, particularly the force conversation. You as a man have to be able to exert apologetic force on bad ideas. I would almost argue that as your first calling as a Christian man is to give a reasoned defense of the hope that is within you. That is, you're explicitly called to be able to do that. Why do you believe what you believe? How do you take apart bad ideas like destinies? And how do you take them apart when they start to crop up before take over our whole civilization? So you have this whole generations of men that didn't cultivate or protect the garden in 1,000 different ways. One of them is ideologically, right? We didn't, when the serpent came into the garden, what did Adam do? He was passive and let Eve rebel. And so now here we are back to the very beginning of the conversation. You had generations of Christian men passive in the face of these ideas taking root. And you can't pin it on any one dude or any one generation. It's been slow, but you have the slow creep of weeds over a garden chokes the garden. And now here we are. So yeah, you have to be, as a man, you have to be able to exert force on yourself first and foremost to get yourself into a position of establishing a productive household. You have to be able to exert force in defense of your family, and you have to be able to exert force against bad ideas and stop them from cropping up again. And so this is the moral call. This is the root of the moral call for men. And I hope they
Yep.
can see the pieces fitting together now.
Yeah, I have optimism in this field.
Yeah, yeah.
One of them is, and one of the simple answers of optimism is, there was no golden age of men. There is
Right.
no there, and even if there was, you will never go back to it. You can't go back in time in that way. And so every generation, and every even we can every generation has its duties and its burdens to bear, and every man has his responsibilities to uphold. And we see this on a microcosm level with individuals, but we can even see it on a greater level of, what do you see complained about today? Communism is creeping everywhere. Communism will always be creeping at your doorstep.
Right.
You will never get rid of that snake, that demon will never go away. You can never kill it completely. It will all, because it is born in the hearts of men, it will
Mm.
always find its way out. This idea of envy and greed and malice and wickedness and things like dehumanization. Once again, we're back on in an era of slavery, and once again, a certain group of people don't want to believe it's bad or believe it's real. And sure
Mm.
enough, here we are again, going, oh, maybe we aren't the enlightened people that we are claiming to be. Maybe we have a duty, and that's more important than enlightenment. So
Yes, I
uh,
agree.
Will, give me your closing thoughts. If you have advice, maybe we've talked about a couple books already, so I'm not going to ask for a book recommendation because I've got my library list growing every
Right.
day.
Me too.
But give us one piece of closing advice or one thing that has been of relevance to you, and then give us how we can find you and follow your information as you continue further. And let's close it off.
Well, this has been great. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to put some ideas together and take about ideas apart and kick the soccer ball around. It's this has been a blessing to me. Thank you. The one thought that's sticking in my mind right now is this is one of the reasons we talked about in the first conversation about how I'm a heretic from the manosphere. I'm a heretic because I can exert force on their ideas and they don't like it. Right. So it can you can see that as you as a man begin to develop force, because there's lots of ways to exert force, right? And we didn't get into talking about combat sports. We didn't get to talking about firearms, and all these things are valid. Exerting force on the marketplace to generate income, exerting force apologetically in the Christian sense, to fight against bad ideas. These are all the ways that men have available them to them to exert force in a righteous way. And I think this is the real danger. Just this will be my closing thought. You say that men don't know how to say no, and that is true. But I think this is also why men fear to say yes, is because they know that if they say yes to taking up this fight, they will be called to exert force on their environment, and they lack the ability to do that, or fear learning how to do that, or fear many different things. But men have to learn to say yes and make yes their yes and develop the force necessary to achieve their ideas. And what I like about what you're doing and what I like about what you embody is you promote that. You seem to promote that to the men who are listening. And I'm very proud and grateful to be part of this conversation with you. So thank you.
Thank you for the kind words. I will I'll have to take time in private to consider them. So I do appreciate that.
Welcome.
And so thank you very much. Let's you can it's right. You can be found pretty much on all social media platforms at Ren of Men, and then that's renofmen.com.
Renofmen.com. Yes, renofmen.com/links is be the best place to go to
All right.
all those different locations.
So that's the hub. Alrighty.
Yes.
Well, Will, thank you very much for this longer than expected conversation that is going to continue to be one of those foundational talks that we have here. Um, Part of the mission that has come up that has become what we call the Redacted Culture Cast is engaging in the kinds of conversations that give men and women the intellectual tools that have been sort of missing in their environment, or
Yes.
that give us the intellectual conversations to address bad ideas, whether it's ones that well up in our own heart, or it's ones that come out of society and culture, and hopefully give it in the windows and the moments for all that are there. I'm not a giver in any means. I'm just a conduit of opportunity, if I can do that. And that sounds even weirder. So cool. But no, I think
I know the feeling.
yeah, well, I mean, this is the reality of our day and age, and this is who we are. We are standing at the brink always, every day, every morning, having the choice to say, "Here I am, send me," or
Mhm.
"No, not today. I'm scared."
Mm.
And I don't believe that our generation is hopeless, and I don't believe that gun culture is a loss. I don't believe that our rights are perpetually trampled. I think that we oftentimes call it infringement when we've chosen abdication, and that
Mm.
there is a pathway to success, and there is not just a pathway to financial success, but there is pursuit to be had and something worth chasing after. That there is truth in the world. It's not just fashion statements and drip culture, even though fashion statements and hype culture, even though, bro, I got the drip. uh, as the joke says. I'm so bad at that. I'm Midwestern, so I can't actually be serious about anything.
I can't either.
So, well, that being the case, if you want to support the channel, head over to redactedculture.locals.com. That's where you can subscribe for exclusive content, jump into different conversations, and get access to asking me questions. And then from there, if you want to jump on our merch train, there is the redactedllc.com website. That's where you're going to find the current pre-orders for our first run of the hoodies that are genuine marked first run, and the second run of the original classic T-shirts that have the logo or the redacted on the front with the big bracketed R on the back. The belief that we hold in redacted is its privacy and property. So, that being the case, thank you very much for listening. Keep your hatchet sharp and your powder dry.